Settle in. Get comfortable. Sometimes the thing you steal is just a way of saying the thing you can't. Chapter 1. The Invenvoy. The valet knocked at 7 minutes past 6, which meant he had been standing outside the door for 7 minutes working up the nerve. Come in, Franklin. Franklin entered with the expression of a man delivering a casualty report. He was holding a ledger. He was always holding a ledger. If the castle caught fire, Franklin would evacuate with the ledger under one arm and a freshly pressed shirt under the other, and the shirt would be correctly folded. The wardrobe audit, Your Majesty. Edgar took the ledger. He already knew what it said. He'd known since Tuesday when he'd opened the top drawer of his desk looking for a quill and found, folded with the precise care of someone who thought they were being subtle, his gray wool undershirt. Not in his wardrobe, not in the laundry, in her study, under a stack of council correspondence, as if the correspondence might provide plausible deniability. The ledger confirmed what the gray wool had suggested. 3 shirts missing this week, 2 the week before, 1 cloak unaccounted for since Thursday, a linen tunic last seen on the drying rack, currently nowhere in the system. That is 9 items in 11 days, sir. I can count, Franklin. Of course, sir. I only mention it because the rate of attrition is, if I may say so, accelerating. Edgar closed the ledger. He looked at Franklin, who was standing with the rigid posture of a man who had been trained to solve problems and was encountering one that did not respond to starch. Stop tracking the missing items. Sir? Remove them from the inventory. If something goes missing, it was never there. Franklin blinked. In 14 years of service, Franklin had never once failed to account for a shirt. This was not a man who tolerated gaps in his filing system. This was a man who had once spent 3 hours locating a missing sock and had referred to the experience as the worst morning of my professional life. You are asking me to falsify the wardrobe record. I am asking you to stop keeping one. The silence that followed had the quality of a man watching his entire belief system collapse. Franklin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he straightened his shoulders, tucked the ledger under his arm, and said, with the dignity of a soldier accepting a dishonorable discharge, "As you wish, sir." He left. Edgar sat at his desk and did not smile, because Edgar did not smile at 6 in the morning, or at any other time, as a general policy. But something happened at the corner of his mouth that in better light might have been mistaken for the beginning of one. She took the gray one, Andrew observed, calm, satisfied, the tone of a wolf who had been watching a chess game unfold and was pleased with the board position. The gray one is the good one. She has excellent instincts. Edgar did not respond to his wolf. He responded to his wolf approximately 4 times a day, which was 4 times more than he responded to most people, and Andrew considered this ratio perfectly acceptable. The cloak was unexpected, Andrew continued. The cloak suggests escalation. She has moved from auxiliary items to outerwear. This is significant. I am noting it. Andrew noted everything. Andrew had been noting everything since the day Edgar met Dorothy, when she'd walked into the council chamber carrying an archive reorganization plan and a complete disregard for the hierarchical seating arrangement, and his wolf had said, "That one," with such flat certainty that Edgar had gripped the arm of his chair and said nothing for the rest of the meeting. Edgar pulled the morning's correspondence toward him. Border reports, trade figures, a formal complaint from the Southern Territories about grain tariffs. He read the grain tariff complaint with the focus of a man who governed 9 territories and was not, under any circumstances, thinking about the fact that his wife was building a nest out of his wardrobe. He was thinking about it. He'd found it 3 days ago. Not the individual items, the scattered shirts tucked under pillows and folded into desk drawers, the ones that could be explained away as absent-mindedness or laundry errors, or the natural entropy of a shared living space. He'd found the nest itself. She'd been in the bath. He'd come back to their room for a document he'd left on the nightstand, and he'd seen it. Her side of the bed. his shirts, arranged in a ring around her sleeping space. Not thrown, not piled, arranged. Collars overlapping, sleeves tucked, the gray wool at the center and the blue cotton flanking it, and the linen folded flat beneath the pillow like a foundation layer. A structure. A deliberate, careful, specific structure built from his clothing and organized by a logic he didn't understand but could feel the precision of. He'd stood there for 11 seconds. He'd counted them. Then he'd taken the document and left and closed the door and stood in the corridor with his hand flat against the stone wall and his heart doing something that Andrew was monitoring with great interest and zero helpfulness. "That is a nest," Andrew had said. Patient, warm, the tone of a wolf explaining something obvious to a human who needed a moment. "She is nesting. This is what nesting looks like. It is the most important thing that has ever happened to us." He hadn't said anything to her. Not because he didn't want to, but because the nest was hidden, and hidden meant she didn't want him to see it. And if she didn't want him to see it, then the thing she was ashamed of was the wanting. And if the thing she was ashamed of was the wanting, then the worst thing he could do was make her feel seen doing it. So he said nothing. He noticed everything. He stopped sending his clothes to the laundry. Dorothy was in the library when the scent hit her. Cedar smoke and cold iron and clean wool. His scent. Not on him, not drifting from a doorway or a corridor, but on the chair, the reading chair by the fire. He'd been sitting in it recently, long enough that the leather held it. She sat down in the chair before she made the decision to sit down. The leather was still warm. He'd been sitting here recently, probably reading, probably the trade compendium he kept returning to when council sessions frustrated him. She could feel the shape of him in the cushion, the impression his weight had left, and something in her settled into it with a rightness that made her stomach clench. "We are sitting in his chair," Celia said. Flat, defensive, the tone of a wolf who was already constructing an alibi. "Because it is the best chair. It has nothing to do with what it smells like. I resent the implication." Dorothy opened her book. She did not bury her face in the chair's leather armrest and breathe. She absolutely did not do that. What she did was lean her head back, which happened to position her nose near the headrest, which happened to be saturated with cedar smoke and cold iron, and she read her book in that position for 45 minutes without turning a page. The omega in her had started doing this 3 weeks ago. Not the big, dramatic version, the heat-adjacent nesting that the old texts described with breathless reverence as if it were a sacred biological event. This was quieter. This was waking up at 2 a.m. and reaching for his pillow just to hold it against her chest. This was pulling his cloak off the hook when he left for council and wearing it in her study even though the study was warm. This was a hunger she couldn't name and couldn't stop and couldn't admit to, because admitting to it would mean admitting that she, Dorothy Bentley, the woman who had once reorganized the entire palace archive system in a single weekend because she had a free afternoon, the woman who had told the Alpha King's chief advisor to his face that his grain tariff proposal was mathematically illiterate, the woman who had never in her adult life asked anyone for anything she could get herself, needed something, needed someone, needed him specifically, in a way that was cellular and animal and completely outside the jurisdiction of her considerable intellect. She hated it. She loved it. She hated that she loved it. "We don't need the chair," Celia said. "We are choosing the chair. There is a difference. Preferences are not needs. I have made a chart." The door opened. Edgar walked in. He moved through a room the way weather moved through a valley. You knew he was there before you looked. Something in the air changed, the pressure or the temperature or the quality of the silence, and then he was there, filling the doorway with the specific, unhurried authority of a man who had never once in his life needed to announce himself, because every room he entered had already noticed. She adjusted the collar of her dress. She was wearing one of his shirts underneath it, the blue cotton. She'd taken it from the laundry basket that morning. He looked at her. She looked at the book. His gaze rested on her for 3 seconds longer than a casual glance, and 2 seconds shorter than a question. He crossed the room to the bookshelf behind her. He reached over her chair, close, his arm passing near enough that she could feel the heat of it through her sleeve, and she breathed in, involuntarily, cedar smoke and cold iron and clean wool, and underneath it something warmer, something that lived in the low notes of his scent the way bass lived under music. And Celia went absolutely still. Her hand tightened on the edge of the armrest. The leather creaked. He paused. His arm was still extended, his hand on the spine of the book. She could feel his breath in her hair. Neither of them moved for 2 full seconds, which was long enough for Andrew to notice, and short enough for both of them to pretend it hadn't happened. His eyes moved to her hand on the armrest, the whitened knuckles, and then away, and his expression did not change, and he pulled the book from the shelf and straightened and said, "Page 112. You've been on it for the better part of an hour." She looked down at her book. He was right. She had been on page 112 for 47 minutes. "I'm a slow reader. You reorganized the archive in a weekend." Reading and reorganizing are different skills. The ghost of something moved at the corner of his mouth. He turned and walked to the door. His hand was at his side, and his fingers, she noticed, were deliberately open, not curled, not reaching. Open, in the way of a man who had trained himself to keep his hands neutral in rooms where he wanted to use them. He stopped at the door. "The chair suits you," he said. He left. Dorothy sat in his chair and smelled his scent on the leather and on the shirt under her dress, and held her book at page 112 and did not move for a long time. "Noted," said Andrew, from wherever Edgar was. Quiet. Patient. The satisfied patience of a wolf who had all the time in the world and knew exactly how this was going to end. Chapter 2. The Conspiracy. He wore the navy linen on Monday. This was not accidental. He had never done anything accidentally in his life, including being born, which Andrew maintained had been a strategic decision executed with precision timing. "The navy linen," Andrew confirmed, as Edgar pulled it over his head that morning. "Excellent choice. The linen has superior scent retention in the 12 to 18-hour wear window. Cotton bleeds scent after 8 hours. Wool holds it longer, but she hasn't taken a wool in 6 days, which suggests a texture preference shift." "The linen is the correct play." Edgar buttoned the collar. "Leave the top button open." He left the top button open. "And wear it to the afternoon session. The council chamber runs warm. The combination of body heat and the linen weave will produce optimal scent saturation by 4 o'clock, at which point you will remove it and leave it on the chair by the bedroom fire." He did not ask Andrew when his wolf had become a logistics coordinator for a laundry-based intelligence operation. He knew the answer. Andrew had always been this: calm, methodical, patient, the kind of wolf who noticed everything and said nothing until the precise moment when saying something would be most effective. Andrew did not panic. Andrew did not theatrical. Andrew observed and calculated and positioned and waited. And when the moment came, Andrew was already there. It had been 11 days since he'd stopped sending clothes to the laundry. In that time, Dorothy had taken 4 more shirts, a second cloak, the Navy Council jacket, and, most recently, a pair of his wool socks. The socks were what convinced him this was serious. Dorothy had standards. Dorothy had opinions about fabric quality that she expressed with the authority of a woman who had once returned a bolt of imported silk to the Southern Territories because the thread count was an insult to mathematics. For Dorothy to steal a pair of his socks, the drive had to be operating below the level where standards applied. "The socks are significant," Andrew agreed. "She is no longer selecting for quality. She is selecting for scent density. Socks have high scent density. This is science." He wore the navy linen to the morning session, the afternoon session, and a late meeting with a trade envoy from the Western Reach. By 4 o'clock, the council chamber was warm, and the linen was doing what Andrew had predicted it would do. He removed it that evening, folded it once, and left it on the chair by the bedroom fire. It was gone by morning. 12 hours, Andrew said. Faster than the gray wool. She is accelerating. The advisors noticed on Thursday. Your Majesty, said Councilman Graham, with the careful diplomacy of a man addressing a delicate topic. I couldn't help but observe that you have worn the same charcoal tunic to council for the 3rd consecutive day. I have. Is there a laundry concern we should be aware of? There is not. Graham looked at Edgar. Edgar looked at Graham. Edgar's expression contained exactly 0 information, which was its default state and also its most intimidating one. Graham returned to his grain tariff proposal. At the end of the session, Dorothy appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a shawl over what was, unmistakably, his formal council jacket, the one with a silver clasp at the collar that had been a gift from the Northern Reach. It reached her knees. The sleeves were rolled 3 times, and the cuffs still covered her hands. She walked in as if nothing about this was remarkable. I have the revised archive schedule, she said, setting a document on the table. She was talking to Graham. She was not looking at Edgar. She was, however, standing close enough that the cedar smoke and cold iron of his jacket mingled with the lavender and warm breath of her skin and produced something that made Andrew go very still. Edgar watched her. Her hair was half up, the way she wore it when she was working, with loose strands escaping around her face. Her hands were buried in the 2 long sleeves. She looked competent and absurd, and entirely like a woman wearing a king's jacket over her nightclothes and pretending it was a fashion choice. But the way she moved through the room was not quite a pretense. She'd walked to the table without hesitation, placed the document precisely, turned to face Graham, and every step had been too deliberate, too exact, the way a person moves when something underneath them is paying attention to every surface and every scent in the room, and they are working very hard to override it. He'd seen her do this before, the careful, controlled walk of a woman whose wolf was tracking something her human was pretending not to notice. Celia, visible in the precision. An animal dressed in bureaucratic composure. New jacket? Edgar said. She looked at him. Her chin came up. It was hanging in the corridor. That corridor is inside our bedroom. The bedroom has a corridor component. It does not. It has a transitional space between the door and the wardrobe that functions, architecturally, as a corridor. He held her gaze. She held his. Something between them pulled tight, the bond humming at a frequency that had nothing to do with architecture, and his eyes, she noticed, had a ring of amber at the edges. Just for a moment, gold surfacing in the gray like a coin catching light. And something else, something she could see but couldn't name, a quality of stillness in his face that wasn't quite human, the kind of stillness that happened when the wolf was right at the surface and looking at her through his eyes, and the thing looking at her was not evaluating or managing or governing, it was just looking, with the patient, absolute attention of an animal that had found the thing it was always going to find. She felt it in the base of her spine. She felt it in her throat. She felt Celia lean forward inside her chest, ears pricked, attention locked. And she refused to catalog any of it because if she started cataloging it, she would have to acknowledge what the catalog was building toward, and she was not ready for that. She broke first. She looked at Graham. The revised schedule. Thursday deadlines. Let me know. She left. The jacket went with her. She could feel his gaze on her back all the way to the door. She did not turn around. Celia wanted to turn around. Celia wanted to turn around very badly. We are not turning around, Celia said firmly. We have paperwork. Graham watched her go, looked at Edgar, and wisely said nothing. That night, Edgar stood in the doorway of their bedroom and looked at the nest. She was in the bath. He could hear the water. He had approximately 6 minutes. The nest had grown. It was no longer a ring on her side of the bed. It had expanded to cover the full surface, a layered construction of shirts and tunics and cloaks arranged with the specific, deliberate precision of someone who was building something important and did not know she was building something important. The blue cotton was at the center, which he noted. The gray wool was folded beneath the pillows, structural. The navy linen was draped along the left edge. His formal jacket, the one with the silver clasp, was at the foot like a blanket. And in the middle of it, barely visible, was his pillow. Not her pillow. His. She'd taken his pillow and replaced it with one from the guest room, and if he hadn't been paying the specific, focused attention of a man whose wolf was running a scent logistics operation, he might not have noticed. He stood in the doorway. His hands were at his sides, and they were open, and he was breathing carefully, and the room smelled like cedar smoke and cold iron and lavender and warm bread, all of it layered and braided, and Andrew was doing the thing Andrew did when something was exactly, precisely right, which was nothing, just stillness. The satisfied stillness of a wolf who had been waiting and was no longer waiting. "It's beautiful," Andrew said. Not smug, not strategic, just the truth of it, observed with the quiet certainty of an animal who understood nesting at a level the human mind had to learn. Edgar stood there for 4 more seconds. Then he crossed the room, pulled a fresh shirt from his wardrobe, the last clean one, put it on, and wore it for 20 minutes. Then he took it off, folded it once, and placed it at the edge of the nest where she would find it in the morning. He put on the shirt with the wine stain. It was the only one left. Chapter 3. The Empty Closet. Council was at 9. At 7:45, Edgar opened his wardrobe and stood in front of it. 3 items. The wine-stained shirt, which he was already wearing, a pair of formal trousers, and a leather belt. His entire wardrobe, barring the trousers and the belt, was currently arranged on his bed in a carefully constructed oval with his wife at the center of it. He stood in front of the open wardrobe for a full minute. The wardrobe was large, built from ash wood, designed to hold the clothing of a king who governed 9 territories and attended formal functions and occasionally needed to look like he owned more than one shirt. It was empty. There were hangers, there were shelves, there was a small cedar block in the corner for moths. There were no clothes. "This," Andrew said, with the first hint of something that was not quite calm, "is the natural consequence of the strategy. The strategy was correct. We simply did not account for the attrition rate. In retrospect, the attrition rate was always going to exceed supply. This is not a flaw. This is a feature. I have nothing to wear to council. You have the trousers. I cannot attend council in trousers and a wine-stained shirt. The wine stain is subtle. It is not subtle, it is on the front. It is on the left front. Sit with your right side toward the table. Angle your body 12 degrees. The stain becomes invisible from the primary sight line. I am not angling my body 12 degrees for the duration of a 4-hour council session. 14 degrees. I miscalculated. The bedroom door opened behind him. Dorothy walked in. She was carrying a stack of correspondence and wearing 2 of his shirts, layered, the blue cotton under the gray wool, with a belt cinched at her waist, turning the whole arrangement into something that might charitably be described as a tunic dress if one was feeling generous and had never seen actual clothing before. She stopped. She looked at him. She looked at the open wardrobe. She looked at the empty hangers. She looked back at him. A silence settled over the room that had the structural properties of a load-bearing wall. "Where are my shirts, Dorothy?" Her mouth opened. Her eyes went to the bed, where the nest was visible, undeniable, architecturally ambitious, and composed almost entirely of his property. "Define shirts." He waited. "They're being mended." All of them. There was a situation. What kind of situation? A moth situation. In July. Summer moths. That is not a thing. Summer moths are absolutely a thing, Celia said at volume, and I will not be cross-examined about entomology in my own bedroom. Dorothy closed her mouth. She looked at the nest. She looked at Edgar. She looked at the nest again. The correspondence in her hands was shaking, which meant her hands were shaking, which meant the part of her that was always steady and always prepared and always had a footnote ready was, for once, not steady and not prepared and fresh out of footnotes. She sat on the edge of the bed. The nest shifted around her. His gray wool slid against his blue cotton, and the scent that rose from the arrangement was so layered, so dense, so completely saturated with both of them that Andrew went very still and Celia went very quiet and the room held its breath. He looked at her hands. They were resting on his shirts, fingers spread, and the way her fingers pressed into the fabric was not quite conscious. She was holding the shirts the way an animal holds territory. Not gripping, not clutching, but covering. Claiming by contact. Her eyes were hazel and bright, and there was something behind them that was not embarrassment. Something steady and flat and entirely Celia, looking at him through Dorothy's face with the honest, unsoftened directness of a wolf that had stopped pretending. "It's nesting," she said. Flat, looking at the wall. "I know that's what it is. You don't have to, I know. It's an omega thing. It started 3 weeks ago and I've been trying to. I thought I could manage it. I thought if I just took a few things, small things, things you wouldn't notice, I could satisfy it without." She stopped, swallowed. "Without you having to see me like this." "Like what?" "Like someone who can't sleep without smelling you." The words came out fast, like she was pulling a splinter. "Like someone who is 31 years old and reorganized the Royal Archive in a weekend and can't get through a night without your shirt under her pillow because her body decided, without consulting her brain, that your scent is the only thing between her and I don't even know what. Something, an absence, a wrong shape in the dark." She pressed her hands flat on the bed. His shirts were under her fingers. "I hate it. I hate that I can't control it. I hate that the most rational part of me, the part that can calculate grain tariffs and file formal objections and run a palace archive, cannot override the part of me that needs to steal your socks because they smell like cedar smoke and it makes my wolf stop, just for a minute. It makes everything stop, and I—" She ran out of words. Or ran out of the willingness to use them. She sat on the edge of the nest she'd built and looked at the wall, and her jaw was set, and her eyes were bright, and she was holding herself together with the specific, visible effort of a woman who had been doing it her whole life and was tired of it. Edgar sat down beside her. Not close, a foot of space between them. The nest between them and around them and smelling like both of them. "I've known since the second shirt," he said. She turned her head. "The gray wool. You put it under a stack of council correspondence in your study. The correspondence was dated from last month. Nothing in your study is ever out of chronological order. That doesn't. I found the nest 3 days later. You were in the bath. I had 6 minutes." She stared at him. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "You weren't ready." "Ready for what?" "To hear that I've been helping." The silence that followed was a different kind. Not the heavy kind from before. The kind that arrives when the ground shifts under something you thought was solid. "Helping," she said. "I stopped sending my clothes to the laundry 11 days ago." She blinked. "The shirts you've been taking, they're clean. I've been wearing them for 6 hours, which is enough to hold the scent, and then I've been leaving them in places you'd find them. The blue cotton on the chair by the bedroom fire. The gray wool on the hook by the bath. The linen on the desk in your study." She was staring at him with the expression of a woman who was reassembling reality and finding that several of the pieces had been in different positions than she'd assumed. "You've been scenting your own shirts, on purpose." "I have a rotation. The blue cotton on Mondays and Thursdays, the gray wool on Wednesdays, the linen on weekends. The navy council jacket I wear for the full day because the weave retains more heat and the scent saturation peaks at the 12-hour mark." "Tell her about the weekend rotation," Andrew said. "The weekend rotation is inspired." Dorothy's mouth was open. She closed it. She opened it again. She looked at the nest and then at the empty wardrobe and then at the man sitting on the bed, wearing the only shirt he had left, the one with the wine stain on the front, and something in her face shifted. Not the managed version, the underneath one, the one he had seen exactly 4 times in 2 years of marriage, and each time it had rearranged something in his chest that he did not have a filing system for. "You're wearing a wine-stained shirt," she said, "because I stole everything else." "Yes." "And you have counsel in an hour." "Yes." "And you planned this." "I planned the scenting. I did not plan the complete depletion of my wardrobe. That was," he paused, "an operational oversight." She laughed, a real laugh, sudden and warm, the kind that started before she could shape it, and the sound of it did something to the room that the scent of cedar smoke and lavender had been doing slowly for 3 weeks and was now doing all at once. He felt it in his chest. He felt it in the bond. He felt Andrew settle into something so quiet and so warm that it was almost not a feeling at all, but a fact. The fact of being exactly where he was supposed to be. She put her hand on his face. He went still. Not composed still, the other kind. The kind where every part of him was paying attention, and none of it was managed, and the wolf at the center of him, the patient, strategic, watchful wolf, who had been running a scent distribution operation for 11 days, stopped calculating and just looked at her through his eyes. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw. He did not move. His breathing changed, not faster but deeper, the breath of a man who is holding himself steady through an act of will, because the alternative is reaching for her, and he will not reach for her. He will not, because she has to come to him. This has to be hers. Amber flooded his irises. She watched it happen, gold replacing gray, spreading from the center out, slow and warm and completely unhidden, and his face, under her hand, was open in a way she had seen exactly 4 times in 2 years of marriage, each time for less than a second. And now he was holding it there, letting her see it, letting the managed version fall and the underneath version stay. And the underneath version was a man who had been feeding her nest for 11 days, because he understood something about her that she hadn't been able to say. She leaned in. The kiss was not dramatic. It was not desperate. It was slow. Her mouth found his, and it was warm and certain, and tasted like cedar smoke and clean wool and 11 days of patience and 3 weeks of stolen shirts, and the particular, devastating tenderness of a man who had built her a system before she'd asked for one and had never once made her feel small for needing it. His hand came up, found her waist, settled there the way his hand settled on everything, deliberately, with intention, as if the decision to touch her was one he was making with his full attention, and every ounce of it mattered. His other hand came to her jaw, mirroring where hers rested on his, and the symmetry of it, both of them holding each other's faces, both of them choosing this at the same time, made something in her chest crack open that she had been keeping shut for a very long time. She leaned into him. The nest shifted around them, his shirts and her warmth, and the scent of both of them filling the room, his and hers, iron and lavender, wool and bread, all of it woven into one thing until the room was just them, and the space between them was just a memory of distance, and Celia went quiet, not the stubborn denial quiet but the other kind, the kind that happens when the thing you've been fighting for arrives, and you don't have to fight anymore. Andrew said nothing. He didn't need to. She pulled back, forehead against his, both breathing. "You have counsel in 50 minutes, she said. "I have the wine-stained shirt. You cannot wear that to counsel. I have limited options." She looked at him. She looked at the nest. She pulled the gray wool from the pillow, the center of the whole structure, the first shirt she'd ever taken, and held it out. "Wear this one." He took it. It smelled like her, lavender and warm bread, and something warm and green and his, all threaded through the fibers. She gave it back, Andrew said, very quiet. Not strategic, not smug. The simple, honest, open thing underneath all the strategy. She gave back the center. He put it on. He went to council smelling like his wife. Nobody said anything. Graham looked at the shirt, looked at Edgar's face, and for the second time in a week, wisely chose silence. Chapter 4. The Absence. She nested in the open after that. The shame burned off like morning fog. She stopped hiding the shirts under correspondence, stopped pretending the cloak had fallen onto her study chair, stopped constructing alibis that Celia would defend with the conviction of a hostile witness and the logic of a concussed badger. She nested and she let him see it, and the seeing was its own kind of intimacy, one that happened in the small hours when he came to bed and found her asleep inside a fortress of his clothing with her face pressed into the collar of his navy linen. He contributed, not subtly, not strategically, not through the 12-step logistics operation Andrew had been running for weeks. He walked into the bedroom after council, took off his shirt, and handed it to her. She took it. Neither of them acknowledged the transaction with words. It was just how they moved now. A new grammar added to the language of the bond, as natural as the scent recognition that fired every time one of them entered a room the other was in. She is nesting openly, Andrew observed. Warm, settled. This is the optimal state. This is what we have been working toward. The nest is healthy. The bond is reinforced. The system is functioning. But something in the system was not functioning, and Edgar couldn't see it, and Dorothy couldn't say it, and Celia knew it the way Celia knew everything, which was before Dorothy did and with more honesty than Dorothy would tolerate. The shirts are not the thing, Celia said. 2 a.m. Dorothy was awake, lying in the nest, holding his pillow. Edgar was asleep beside her. His arm was across her ribs. His breathing was slow and steady, and the heat of him was right there, right against her back. And the nest smelled correct, and the room was warm, and she was awake and wrong, and she did not know why. The shirts are not the thing, Celia said again, quieter. The sulky denial stripped away, the stubbornness gone, just the flat, honest underneath. They were never the thing. She didn't answer. She pressed her face into his pillow and breathed, and the scent was right, and the warmth was right, and the shape of him against her was right, and something was wrong, and it was wrong in the way that a photograph of a fire is wrong, which is that it looks correct but does not give heat. The border dispute arrived on Thursday, the Western Reach. A territorial incursion along the river boundary, 2 pack claims overlapping, the kind of thing that required the Alpha King's presence and his particular talent for standing in a room and saying nothing until everyone else in the room had agreed with him out of sheer self-preservation. 3 days, he said, 5 at the outside. He was standing in their bedroom with a traveling case open on the chair, not the bed. She noticed that. He was packing on the chair because the bed was a nest, and the nest was hers, and he would not put a traveling case on it. The small, precise courtesy of a man who understood boundaries he had never been taught. Of course, she said. The Western Reach has been unstable since the spring. You should have gone weeks ago. I should have. She was sitting on the bed, in the nest. Her legs drawn up, his cloak over her shoulders, the blue cotton under her pillow. She looked the way she always looked, which was certain and contained and completely present. And he looked at her the way he always looked at her, which was with the focused, unblinking attention of a man who had learned to memorize things he was about to lose sight of. I'll be fine, she said. I know. The nest is well stocked. I know. I have 17 of your shirts, a cloak, your council jacket, 4 pairs of socks, and your pillow. I could survive a siege. Something happened to his mouth. Not a smile. Close. The near-miss version. He crossed the room. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, then her mouth. Briefly, the way a man does when he is leaving and does not want to make the leaving larger than it needs to be. She put her hand on his jaw. He closed his eyes. Come back, she said. Not come back safe or come back soon, just come back. As if the only relevant variable was his return and the timeline was negotiable. I will. He left. The first night was manageable. The nest smelled right. She rearranged the shirts, a behavior she now recognized as maintenance rather than obsession, and she slept, and the scent of cedar smoke and cold iron held her the way his arm held her, approximating the real thing closely enough that her body accepted the substitution. The second night was not manageable. The scent was thinner, not gone, but fading. She could feel the difference, the way you feel the difference between a warm room and a cooling one. Not a cliff edge, but a gradient. And somewhere in the gradient, the thing stopped working. The shirts smelled like him, the way a letter smells like someone's hand. A residue, a trace, a thing that was once present and is now a record of presence, rather than presence itself. She lay in the nest, and it was correct, and empty, and she was holding his pillow, and it was soft and wrong, and Celia, who had spent 3 weeks denying that any of this was happening, who had constructed an elaborate defense system around the premise that this was temperature regulation and organizational preference, and absolutely not the desperate, cellular, animal need of an omega for her mate, said, more. Not loud, not the all-caps version, just the word, stripped of everything except what it meant, which was, this is not enough. This has never been enough. The shirts were the acceptable distance between wanting him and admitting you want him, and you have been sleeping inside a perimeter of his clothing because you could not bring yourself to say the sentence, I need you here. And the shirts were the compromise your pride could survive, and the compromise is failing. It was never the shirts, Celia said. I know. It was always him. I know. Then why didn't you say it? He was right there. He was standing in this room with a traveling case, and you said, of course, and I'll be fine, and the nest is well stocked. And you listed his shirts like an inventory report, and he left because you told him to leave, and you told him to leave because you have never, once, in your entire life, asked anyone to stay. Dorothy buried her nose in his pillow and inhaled, and the cedar smoke was there, but thinning, and her eyes were wet, and Celia was right. And she hated that Celia was right, because Celia was always right, and Celia's rightness was the kind that had no footnotes, and no formal objections, and no witty counter-arguments, just the flat, honest, animal truth of a wolf who could see through every defense her human had ever built. She did not sleep. She lay in the nest and held his pillow, and smelled the fading cedar smoke, and counted the things she had not said. I need you here. Stay. Don't go. Come back now. Not in 3 days. Now. Each one a sentence she had swallowed, because swallowing was what she did, because she had been swallowing since she was 9 years old, and her father had gone to the northern reach and not come back, and her mother had said, we don't chase people who choose to leave, and the lesson had calcified into a law, don't need anyone who can walk out the door. And the fear underneath the swallowing was not that Edgar would say no, it was that he would say yes, and she would know for certain that she was the kind of person who needed someone, and that knowledge would live in her forever, and she would never again be the woman who could reorganize the archive in a weekend because she had a free afternoon and needed nothing from anyone. The bond pulled west, toward the border, toward wherever he was, and the pull was a compass needle pointing at the only thing in the world that would make the nest feel like a nest, instead of a perimeter around an absence. She pulled the pillow tighter against her chest and held on to the last trace of him in the fabric, the way you hold on to the last warm stone from a fire that went out hours ago. And then, sometime after 3, the thought arrived. It arrived the way her mother's voice always arrived, not as a memory but as a fact, delivered from a room inside her that had been furnished since she was 9 and had never been redecorated. The thought was, I have become the thing I swore I would never be. She sat up. The nest shifted around her. His shirts, his cloak, his pillow, his scent in every fiber, fading, and her, curled at the center of it like something small and dependent and entirely unable to function without a man who was 2 days' ride away doing the job he was supposed to be doing. This was what need looked like. This was the shape of it. A woman sitting in a pile of stolen clothing at 3 a.m, unable to sleep because the clothing was losing his smell. Her mother would have stripped the bed. Her mother would have folded every shirt, pressed every crease, and put them in a drawer and closed the drawer and slept on clean sheets that smelled like nothing, because nothing was what you needed when you'd learned that needing someone was just giving them a door they could walk through. Dorothy pulled the blue cotton from under the pillow, the first shirt she'd ever taken, the center of the whole structure. She held it in her hands and she could feel the architecture of the nest shift, the other shirts responding to the gap, and she thought, I can put them all away. I can fold them. I can prove that I am still the person who doesn't need this. I can be her mother's daughter, the one who sleeps on clean sheets and doesn't chase, and doesn't ask, and doesn't stand in doorways waiting for someone to come back. She started folding the shirt, collar to hem, the way Franklin folded them, precise, flat, the scent trapped inside. Her hands stopped. She was kneeling on the bed with the blue cotton half folded in her lap, and her hands wouldn't finish the fold. Not because she was crying, although she was, but because the wolf in her, the sulky, stubborn, fed-up wolf who had denied everything for 3 weeks and then said, more, with such honesty that it had broken something in the room, that wolf was not going to let her fold this shirt. Not because Celia was fighting her, not because the wolf was a separate thing with separate opinions, because the part of Dorothy that was Celia, the animal layer of her own mind, the part that knew things before she admitted them, had already decided. This is not weakness. This is what it looks like when you love someone enough to be changed by it. And the shirt stays. Put it back, Celia said. Not loud, not sulky, not fed up. Just the flat, certain, honest voice of a wolf who had been right about everything from the beginning and was tired of watching her human try to fold herself back into a shape she no longer fit. Dorothy unfolded the shirt. She put it back under the pillow. She lay down in the nest and she did not strip the bed, and she did not sleep, and she did not pretend she was fine. She lay there and she let it be what it was, which was need, which was terrifying, which was the truest thing she had ever felt. And she held the blue cotton against her chest and waited for morning. Edgar sat in a camp chair in the Weston Reach, with a treaty draft in his lap and his hand on the collar of his shirt, the one she hadn't taken, the one that smelled like her only faintly, like lavender remembered rather than lavender present. He caught himself doing this 3 times today, the collar, the fabric between his fingers, the fading trace of her scent in the weave. Each time he'd stopped, put his hand back on the treaty, returned to the work. Each time it had lasted less than a minute before his hand was back on the collar. This is unacceptable, Andrew said, not calm, not strategic. Restless in a way that Andrew had never been restless. A wolf who had been patient his entire life, discovering the specific limit of patience, and finding it here, 2 days' ride from a nest he should be in. The negotiation was going well. His second, a steady beta named Harry, who had handled 3 border disputes independently and 2 more with Edgar's guidance, was doing exactly what Edgar would have done, which was standing in the room, saying nothing until the other party folded. Edgar looked at the treaty draft. He looked at Harry. He looked at the collar of his shirt. "You have this," he said. Harry looked at him. "Sir?" "The negotiation. You have it. You've had it since yesterday. I am a redundancy." "With respect, Your Majesty, you are the Alpha King. And you are the man who is going to finalize this treaty, because I am leaving." Harry stared at him. Andrew said nothing. For the first time in Edgar's life, his wolf said absolutely nothing, because nothing needed to be said, because the decision was already made. And Andrew had known it would be made before Edgar had sat down, and the knowing was not strategy, it was just the truth. Chapter 5. The Stay. She heard the horse in the courtyard at dawn. She was in the nest. She had not slept. She was wearing 3 of his shirts, layered, the blue cotton and the gray wool and the linen, as if the accumulation of fabric could substitute for the thing the fabric represented. And it could not, and she knew it could not, and she was wearing them anyway, because the alternative was admitting she was alone, in a bed in a castle, and the most powerful part of her, the part that could reorganize archives and calculate tariffs and stare down advisors and file formal objections, could not get her through a night without him. The courtyard, horse hooves on stone, the sound of a dismount, fast, the particular landing of a man who was not tired despite riding through the night. She sat up. The nest shifted. The bedroom door opened. Edgar stood in the doorway. Road dust on his boots, cloak over one shoulder. His hair was pushed back, his jaw was set, and his eyes were gray with the permanent gold ring that meant Andrew was right at the surface and not retreating. She stared at him. The negotiations. Delegated. You can't just... I can. I did. He took his boots off. He took his cloak off. He walked to the bed, to the nest, and he got in. Not beside the nest, in it. He lay down inside the structure she had built, inside the architecture of his own scent and her need, and the shirts shifted around him, and the pillows adjusted, and he was there. Not a photograph, but a fire. Not a residue, but a source. And the scent that rose from his skin was not fading, not remembered, not a record of presence, but presence itself. Cedar and iron and wool, the same notes she'd been stealing for weeks, but alive now, warm from his skin, carrying the heat of a man who had ridden through the night because an empty nest was a question, and his answer was his body in it. She didn't move. This is not how a kingdom works, she said. This is exactly how this kingdom works. You have a treaty on the table. You have a territorial dispute. You have 9 territories and a border and a responsibility that I have a wife who builds a nest out of my shirts because she can't bring herself to ask me to stay. She stopped talking. Her mouth closed. Her hands found the edge of the nest and gripped. I have a woman who reorganized the Royal Archive in a weekend and can calculate grain tariffs to the 4th decimal and cannot say the sentence, I need you here. I have an Omega who is so afraid of needing anyone that she'd rather sleep inside a perimeter of my clothing than say 4 words out loud. And I have been standing on the other side of those 4 words for 2 years, Dorothy, waiting for you to say them, and you haven't, because you don't ask people for things. And I have been, for reasons I cannot fully explain, respecting that, when what I should have been doing is this. He gestured at himself. In the nest, boots off, cloak on the floor, road dust on a king who was lying in his wife's carefully constructed fortress of his own shirts, as if this were the most obvious place in the world for him to be. He was looking at the ceiling. She was looking at him. His jaw was set but not locked. His hands were on his chest and they were open. The shirts were not the thing, she said. I know. They were never the thing. I know. They were how I asked without asking. I know that too. She didn't move. Not immediately. She was standing at the edge of the nest, looking down at him lying in it, and the distance between standing and lying down was not physical. It was everything she had ever believed about herself. That she was the person who managed, who coped, who filed the objection and found the solution, and did not, ever, need to be held. That version of her was still standing. That version had its arms crossed and its chin up and its footnotes ready. But Celia, who had been sulky and loud and in furious denial for 3 weeks, went quiet. Not the stubborn kind, the finished kind. The kind that happens when a wolf has run out of walls to build and finds that the room without walls is not terrifying. It is just a room with someone in it. Dorothy uncrossed her arms. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at him. He looked at the ceiling and waited. And the waiting was the gift. The specific and costly gift of a man who would not reach for her, because this had to be her walking the last 3 feet on her own. She lay down beside him. Not slowly. Not with the deliberate, managed care of a woman who was choosing her position. She lay down the way you lie down when you have stopped choosing and started arriving. And her head found the place between his shoulder and his jaw, and her hand found the place over his heart, and the nest closed around both of them. She said it, the word, the one she hadn't been able to say. Stay. He didn't answer with words. He put his arm around her. His hand found her waist and settled there the way it settled on everything, deliberately, with the full weight of his attention. And he pulled her close, and she let him. And the letting was the bravest thing she had ever done. Braver than the archive reorganization, and the grain tariff objection, and the council stare-downs. Braver than anything she had ever done with her considerable intellect. Because this required nothing from her brain, and everything from the part of her that had been stealing his shirts in the dark, because it could not say his name. His heartbeat under her hand, slow, steady. The heartbeat of a man who had left a treaty on the table, and a border dispute unsettled because this mattered more, and he was done pretending it didn't. Home, Andrew said. Not smug, not strategic, not calculating scent retention, or wear windows, or linen saturation rates. Just the word, and the word was enough. They lay there. Morning light came through the window and fell across the nest, and across his hand on her waist, and across her face pressed into his shoulder, and the room smelled like both of them. Not layered anymore, not his and hers, but merged, the way 2 scents become one when the source is the same place. He had a second wardrobe made, 2 of everything, 1 set to wear, 1 set kept in a cedar chest at the foot of their bed, pre-scented, rotated weekly, maintained by Franklin, who had been given a new ledger and a new purpose, and had accepted both with the solemn gravity of a man who had found religion. The staff thought it was eccentric. The council thought it was irrelevant. Franklin thought it was the most important wardrobe management innovation in the history of domestic service, and was privately considering writing a monograph. She found the chest on a Tuesday. She was looking for a book that had slipped between the bed and the wall, and her hand found the cedar lid instead, and she opened it. And inside were 14 of his shirts, folded with Franklin's precision, arranged by fabric type, each one worn for exactly 6 hours, and stored in cedar to preserve the scent. She looked at the chest. She looked across the room at Edgar, who was reading at his desk, with the studied focus of a man who had definitely heard her open the chest, and was definitely pretending he hadn't. "You built me a supply chain." He turned a page. "I built you options." "The weekend rotation," Andrew said, very quietly, very satisfied, "remains inspired." She closed the chest. She crossed the room. She stood behind his chair and put her arms around his shoulders, and her face against his neck, and breathed him in. Cedar smoke, and cold iron, and clean wool. The source, not the residue, not the record. The living, breathing, impossibly patient source of every scent she had ever stolen. "You're blocking my light," he said. "You'll manage." She stayed. He let her. The morning came through the window and fell across the desk and the chest and the nest on the bed and the 2 of them in the chair, and the room smelled like home.